Hi, and welcome to Take30 with a data scientist. We're here on Take30 Thursday. This topic of conversation today is something very close to my heart, is trustworthy AI. My name is Matthew Davis. I'm the data science manager at Ironside. And I have the pleasure of having with me today Armand Ruiz-Gabinet, who is Data Science Director at IBM, and we'll be talking about their Trustworthy AI platform. Armand?
All right. Thank you so much, Matthew, and welcome everybody. I hope you get the most out of this session. So as Matthew said, I'm a director at IBM. I manage a team of over 100 data scientists, and I used to work in product as well. So I'm very excited to share with you some of the things about trustworthy AI, trusting AI, and basically putting models into production in a way that you can trust and rely on them. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the opportunity and the challenges that we see in the industry. My team did last year over 200 projects in many different industries. So I get a pretty good view of what's the state of the art right now in terms of machine learning in production at scale for, especially for regulated environments. I'm going to talk about MLOPS and trustworthy AI solutions and some examples, and I'll share a customer story as well. We'll have some time as well for Q&A, but we have a lot to cover, so let's jump to it. The first thing I want to share, and this is no news, I hope for most of you, is about the promise of AI being something very clear, and Gartner forecasts that AI software market will reach 62 billion by 2022. So it's a huge opportunity. I'm super bullish on AI. I live and breathe AI, and I see it as a way to transform current operations to be more efficient, to automate processes, and then to tap into new markets. But what I see many companies doing is they're embracing AI, and they are even managing to put AI at scale in production, which is already like a huge step, very, very difficult to achieve, to be honest. But once they get into that stage of already putting models into production, we get into new set of challenges and problems, like how you can trust that AI. Now we start to see regulations coming up in different environments. I'll talk a little bit about that, and how you can make sure your AI is being responsible and fair. So I think it's good to see a little bit of some examples of how AI can go wrong, and things that can, how AI in an uncontrolled way can be a threat for your enterprise. The AI, if it's not done properly, can damage your brand or your customer's brand. Now, as I mentioned, we're getting into pretty strict regulation in some areas, so you can get fines or you can fail with some audits, and at the end of the day, you can lose revenue or actually get higher expenses. And I just captured here some news about AI actually going wrong, and I think these are well known. I'm sure you heard about some of them in the past, but let's just walk through it a little bit. I have here one about Apple Card algorithm sparks gender bias allegations against Goldman Sachs. I think this was pretty big news last year for the new Apple Card services that they released. Data science during COVID seems reassembly required. So when we had COVID at the beginning of March 2020, there were a lot of data science projects, and I read news that AI was not as effective as it should have been, or when it was effective, it was not as trusted because of a lack of good data sets and AI is basically trained with historical data. There is this one from BlackRock, shelves unexplainable AI liquidity models. So that's another big problem where you have AI models, especially deep neural networks, and then you have some kind of like regulatory asking you for explainability of those models. Depending on the algorithm that you're using, it's actually really, really hard. And I think another one that is very, very popular if you are close to real estate is what happened with Zillow, the 300 million flip-flop, how real estate site Zillow's side hustle went badly wrong. So they have this then estimate to estimate the value of properties, which is basically an outcome of a model. And that's where it's very important to combine the outcome of an algorithm with human experts, and have that combination is when you hit a lot of success, but don't rely 100% in, for some cases, in AI, because it can be dangerous for the business. And then I'm pretty sure you heard about some problems with bias. Algorithm bias isn't just unfair, it's bad for business. So some customers deployed AI models that were trained with biased data sets, and those are you can see in the predictions coming from the AI that the AI is not being fair or is being biased. So I think this is just to put you a little bit in context. These are all news from, I think most of them are from last year. So it's great to see companies getting into the point that they put AI into production. Now we are entering a new phase where we start to see some things going wrong, and I want to talk about what we can do to avoid that. So as a summary, we want to make sure when you use AI, you don't damage your brand, you follow all the regulatory rules that are coming up, and you basically don't lose any revenue and higher expenses. So there is a framework for that to avoid all those things, following the Trustworthy AI framework. And that framework is a mix of process, a new way to do things, but also you need the right tooling and the right software in order to do that at scale. So this is the life cycle, and if you've been in some of the past sessions about data science, there is a very clear life cycle where you collect data, prepare data, train models, put them into production, and you monitor how they work, right? So this is pretty standard. The first two steps, I'm not going to spend that much time today on the data side. You obviously need data, or you need to either collect it, you need to either maybe buy it, maybe you need to actually generate it. I know a lot of successful AI use cases where you don't have training data, and you pretty much manufacture that data using new techniques that are very successful. But then once you have that data in one form or the other, you need to prepare that data and get it ready for AI. So as I said, I don't want to spend time today on the data, but just to be super clear, anything companies create in the AI side comes from the quality of the data. So I'm sure you heard that quote of garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is not high quality, if your data is not well representing all the populations and the use cases that you want to cover, you won't get good results with AI. And the best is to have as much of that data available for the data scientists to use it, to experiment, as long as there is no with all the set boundaries that are required given confidentiality sometimes. But okay, so let's move on from the data side. As I mentioned, that's not the main goal of today's session. So let's assume the data side is all sorted out, which is hard. But let's talk about models, right? So a lot of people focus when we're talking about AI on building models. And I think it's most likely maybe it's the fun part, is where you experiment with different algorithms, you train those models, you fine tune them, you combine them, you tweak the hyperparameters, you do the feature engineering. That's where a lot of data scientists spend a lot of time. There are a lot of exciting tools as well in the market. Some of them open source, some of them are no code, low code that enable people or analysts without deep data science skills to build models, and that's super exciting. But we get into the point where actually those models, if you don't actually put them into production, they don't have the impact that they are supposed to have, right? So that's where we've seen a lot of customers jumping into deployment of models, and they've done this somehow pretty successfully. It's challenging because depending on the environment, is not easy to coordinate with all the different teams, IT departments, um, software teams that they need to embed the models into the application, so or the processes. But we're seeing a lot of customers successfully doing that already. And there are tools that help do that very successfully as well and simplify the model deployment. But now, once you put those models into the wild west of the business, they start making predictions. They start making recommendations. They start sometimes making decisions directly on some parts of the business. So that's where model monitoring plays a huge role here. And um, when you put models into production, you need to make sure first there is this practice called MLOPS to continuously deliver models into production. This is not a one-time thing. Those models need to be refreshed. Those models need to be updated very often. In some cases, I've seen those models are being updated in real time or several times a day or once a day. It depends on the use case and the business need, but it needs to have this continuous delivery of models into production. Uh, Before putting those models into production, you need to make sure you train them with fair data sets, and those predictions that are coming out of those models are fair. And then there is the explainability component. So imagine you get a model making a decision, making some sort of predictions. You need to make sure you can understand how that model is making that decision, right? So how did the AI arrive to that outcome? And a very good example is, for example, on a loan credit, it will assess if a potential customer applying for a loan um, is potentially a good customer or not, right? And if you need to provide an explanation, you need to open up that black box of AI and understand, okay, why the AI is making that prediction, is seeing risk or not risk for that specific customer. And those models need to be very robust, right? Especially we saw that during COVID, how everything changed from one day to the other. We are in a very dynamic and moving environment nowadays. So those models need to be very responsive to business changing conditions. So what is very important is that those models are actually very well tied to business KPIs, and you can quickly see how they perform. So we as I mentioned, is a mindset, is a process thing. There is a lot of components of tooling, because actually doing all these things is pretty hard if you want to do it manually, and especially if you want to do it at scale. I always I always say to my customers that the goal is not to have like 1, 2, or 3 models in production. My expectation is that customers will have hundreds or thousands of models in production, and I've seen customers doing that. So in order to do that properly, you need some good tools for that. There are a lot of good tools out there in the market. Obviously, I'm pushing for our IBM tooling, which provides a lot of innovations from IBM research. But basically, when you have a model in production, uh, you will get like different scores on different important metrics like fairness, right? So this will tell you automatically the fairness score for a model and how is that evolving over time in production. So there is a lot of magic running underneath, but it's going to tell you exactly the fairness score and if you can actually trust. And then it's also doing like not only bias detection. I've seen a lot of tools that do the monitoring, but also bias mitigation. So which kind of new data you need to train the model so it's biased, or even it will generate data for you to tweak the model so it becomes biased. So there is a lot of magic running underneath on this kind of tooling. But basically, you will come to a dashboard, you will have all your models, and you will see for each of them their bias over time and how that is affected. Uh, as I mentioned, model explainability is super important, right? So you want to get all the way to the transaction level, right? For like there are models that they are doing like thousands of predictions per minute or per hour. So you need to be able to click in every prediction and understand why that prediction was giving that specific outcome. So there is tool that just opened up that black box right away. Drift detection. I don't know if you're familiar with drift detection, but if you put a model into production, it will drop in accuracy and consistency over time just by nature of it, right? And it's a degradation of models and the model performance, and you need to continuously rephrase those models with new retraining data and do automatic redeployments. So again, how you detect that, how you mitigate that in an automatic fashion. And what I've seen in many use cases is that you don't put one single model into production, you put a combination of models into production. So how you orchestrate, that's not becoming just like one challenge, it's like a bunch of different challenges just for one single use case, and how you coordinate all that and how you orchestrate all those models. So again, we have a lot of tooling in order to do that, and so the outcome of one can trigger an action in another one, things like that. So this is for more advanced use cases, but it's becoming pretty important nowadays because that's the way to tackle some very complex tasks. And as I mentioned, models need to be retrained. So how you do that? You call again the data scientists so they retrain it, or you can automate that. Obviously, we want full automation here with controls and alerts, right? So you hit thresholds, and when something is going south, and you don't really like how the performance of the model is going, it can trigger automatically a retraining or of the model, and even it can automatically trigger an auto deployment of the model. It depends how much automation you can apply, or you want, or you are allowed to. But it's important to have those options in case. Let's talk quickly about process. I'm going to focus about two out of this, and you will have all this information. One is lineage, facts and lineage, and the other one is governance. Lineage is super important because it's all about having all that information about a model, right? So making sure it's clear who trained that model, which date, which data sets, where the data set is coming from. If you change the model, why did you change it, and when? And all that information, all that metadata for a model is very important to have it in a lineage way, because I've seen regulatory audits asking for actually reports, and those reports, I've seen companies spending weeks or months generating those reports manually, and there is tooling to generate those reports automatically and provide them in a very clean way. And then how you manage in the governance space, how you manage AI model compliance risk, and you make sure you are following all the regulatory standards. So I did include a slide that I have that is actually pretty good. If you are interested, let me know. It's about all the AI regulations that are coming up in worldwide. There are some important ones in Europe. There are some important ones for specific industries. But my main message here is that doing responsible AI is not anymore a choice. It's becoming already a must-have for AI projects. So you need to make sure you follow a responsible AI framework, and we participate in a certification where IBM is a founding member, where we provide that framework, and for projects we provide that kind of certification. So you make sure when you create a project, you have accountability, customer protection, the robustness, and all these things I'm talking about here. But I think the main message here is that it's not becoming, for many industries, it's not becoming a choice, it's becoming a must-have for your AI projects. Want to talk about very quickly about, I'm going to switch this one, about model validation, right? So this is something in model risk governance. So when there are two steps, right? When you train a model and you try to validate that model and make sure it's good for going into production, and then how you manage risk, and all that can be very hard to do if done manually. So you need to have the right tools to do that step by step. I will be more than happy to show you exactly how we do it with our tooling, but it can be it's very similar with any other tooling. And I will be glad to show a demo in another occasion, end to end, from training to MLOPS, deployment of models, to going into pre-production, assessing how a pre-production model will work, how you put it into production and assess and monitor all these things that I'm talking about. So you're getting here just a high level. And a great example that I always share is something that we've been working at the end of last year, and this Q1 this year is for it's for a big bank, right? And you will find customers that are in different stages. Some of them are very early on AI. Some of them they've been already doing AI for in some way for a very long time. So in this case, this company had 25,000 citizen analysts and data scientists. They deployed already thousands of models, and this is at a company-wide level, right? They use different tools. Some of them they use data robots. Some of them use H2O. Some of them use SPSS modeler or IBM tools, SAS, MATLAB, whatever you want to use. You need to add an AI governance hub. So in this case, the CEO wanted to track model compliance and governance across the entire financial institution. And we did that. We did that very successfully. And there is like a very cool dashboard that provides insights on all the models. You get alerts, you get things that get triggered, and is a huge reduction of labor, increased consistency on how the company is putting models into production, and it's basically hitting on all the trustworthy AI points that I talk about: bias, drift, quality, explainability, robustness, and things like that. So you can do it at this huge scale, as I'm sharing here. You can do it at a smaller scale. I think the most important is to get started, and there are different ways, and we can talk about that as well. So let me pause here for a moment. I want to open it up for some Q&A. And yeah, Matthew, we have also a call to action. In case you need help, you can write an email to helloai@ouronsidegroup.com to get us engaged. Let's open it up for Q&A.
Sure. So it looks like the first question we have looks like you partially addressed, which is, how do you govern multiple models on multiple platforms and even multiple clouds?
Yeah. So obviously we love when customers use IBM tooling, but and they use IBM cloud, but that's not the reality out there. And there are a lot of good clouds, good tools out there, and we see customers using a bunch of them, right? Depending on their use case. So what we've been very obsessed is to provide flexibility, and if you've been following what IBM is doing, is all about hybrid cloud. So you can basically, number one, deploy our software anywhere and run it natively. And second, you can, when it comes to trustworthy AI, you can add that layer of trusted AI governance on top of any tooling or framework that customers already have. And that was very important. Obviously, if you want to use the end-to-end IBM tooling, that's amazing. But most likely will be in environments where there is a combination of things, and you can add that layer on top to add all these components that I'm talking about.
That's a great answer. So yeah, the next question we have, more of a general question. We'd like to introduce data science into our business. How do we get started? So thinking about that problem, you can really break it down into three components. It's people, process, and technology. The people you need to have in place really are people that understand your source systems and where your data is being created, and also how that's being warehoused and stored. And then you also are going to need data scientists, and that they're a pretty hot commodity lately. But people that are able to take your data in its stored form and create models. And then you're also going to need people that essentially know how to deploy those on whatever platform you choose. So that's really what you need in terms of people. Process is quite a bit more complicated. So you really need, and Ironside has a very good, well-founded process called Ascent AI for this. And essentially, it's a systematic way to go and identify use cases, in your business that have, business value and also viable data. You really need those two components. So you need to be able to systematically discover those, create low-cost proofs of concept, and from those, the ones that bear fruit and look like they're going to be meaningful to the business, those can eventually be, deployed as actual in production and products. So processes kind of govern that to make sure that, you're not endlessly developing, something that never sees the light of day. But you actually do find where there is really good data and really good value for the business. Then Armand, I don't know if you want to address the technology part of that, but I'm sure you've got quite a bit of insights there.
Yeah, I think the technology is maybe the last part, but it's becoming essential when you are trying to scale, right? I have a lot of customers, they claim they can do things just using open source. And I agree, you can go very far with open source, but it's missing the point of what we're trying to do with many customers, which is reaching scale in a way that you can actually trust and have the proper support. So, and we use a lot of open source within our projects, and we contribute to those open source projects, right? So it's important when it comes to actually doing this at, like the example I shared, right, at scale, company wide, and especially if you're dealing with like regulations and auditing, right? So I believe there is a lot of magic going on underneath of these things to do things like opening up the black box of AI and deep learning algorithms, or providing explainability or bias detection or mitigation, right? So you need pretty advanced products to do that. I believe we have and reports said we have some of the best products out there, and I've been part of the product team for many years. So it's super exciting to see the results when we work with customers.
All right, thanks. Well, I don't think we have any further questions. So I appreciate you guys spending this half hour with us. And you can reach out to us at our respective websites. I'm not sure if we have a slide for that. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, let me just add one more thing. Well, two more things very quickly. I think a great way to start with customers, we do those workshops that Matthew was saying. It's a great way to have like that brainstorming session on AI and use cases, and then you tackle the first one that can have like huge business value and can be done quickly. And then the other thing that we are doing that is becoming very successful is what we call the AI health check. So if you have a customer that already has a lot of models into production, we can run a health check, which is like a combination of using our tools with some people that will help to do that. And basically we provide a report, okay, for those models that you have already into production, these are the things that you need to improve in terms of like bias, drift, explainability, and we provide a path forward. So that's becoming also very successful for those companies that they want to start doing trusted AI, but they don't really know where to start.
All right, yeah, those sound like excellent next steps. All right, well, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
All right.